Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Rosa, and welcome to Rosa's Trains. Today, I'm going to discuss my all-time favorite episode from my childhood TV show, Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. This video will focus on Series 3, Episode 9, titled Henry's Forest. Now, for those of you who are new to my channel, this isn't my first video related to Thomas, because I previously filmed a few of them showing my VHS and DVD collection, as well as my Thomas Wooden Railway trains that I used to play with as a young lad. I also have a Lionel O-Gauge model based on the titular character of this popular TV series. But other than that, I have not made a Thomas-related video for a long time. One of the reasons I've decided to create this one you're about to watch is that I'm a subscriber to a YouTube channel called The Unlucky Tug, who is extremely fond of Thomas and Friends. Well, technically, he named his channel after a character from a short-lived sister series called Tugs, which was filmed in the same studio as Thomas. He's done an excellent job explaining all the fun facts, as well as his personal opinions on almost everything about the Little Blue Tank Engine and all his friends living on the magical island of Sodor. Additionally, he uploaded a video analysis documenting a 2000 film called Thomas and the Magic Railroad, the very first movie of the entire franchise. So, if you're a true Thomas fan, but you haven't already, I highly recommend subscribing to The Unlucky Tug. Anyway, I'm going to begin this video with a summary of my favorite episode and explain why I love watching it numerous times. So, without further ado, this is Brian LaRosa's personal documentary of Henry's Forest. Henry, the big green engine, is happy to live in no place better than the island of Sodor. While he likes every natural place in his homeland, Henry's true favorite is a huge forest with lots of trees, which of course have millions and millions of leaves in the same color as his paint. One day in the forest, Henry was remembering the time when he and Toby the tram engine brought some young trees there, and they eventually grew much bigger. Although he didn't have an exact reason behind his enjoyment of the forest, the basic keywords that come to mind are peace, quiet, and comfort. However, Henry's feelings completely changed when a storm raged across the island. The other engines had a conversation about the wind that had never been blowing so fiercely outside the sheds, making Henry hope that it would do no harm to the forest. Unfortunately, he was wrong when the damage was done after the windy storm ended by morning. As Henry carried his empty flat cars to the forest, he found so many fallen trees and was very sad, not without his concern for all the animals living there before the storm. Henry's train carried the logs to a timber mill so they could be useful for furniture, carpentry, and other wood applications. Despite those benefits, Henry was still upset about the partial loss of his forest. Thomas and Toby sympathetically wanted to make their friend's favorite place better, but they didn't know how. Fortunately, after hearing the concern, Sir Topham Hatt, the superintendent of the railway, gave Toby a special job of bringing some freight cars to the forest. These were loaded with healthy young trees waiting to be planted at their new home. Back in the forest, Henry couldn't believe his eyes. Trevor and Terence had teamed up with the workers to clear away the stumps and branches and to plant the newly arrived trees. Terence told Henry that the forest was close to being fully restored and would look even better than before. As indeed it did. While the trees grew strong and tall, the animals successfully returned to their habitats. Once again, Henry turned much happier to visit the now healthier forest, and it will always be his favorite part of the island of Sodor. So, now you know the whole story of Henry's Forest. Let's dive deeper into the major elements that make this episode my true favorite in the whole TV series. Henry is a long, fast engine who started off as a stubborn character in his debut episode, The Sad Story of Henry. He deliberately stopped inside a tunnel to protect his coat of paint from the rain, and he refused to come out. After all the failed efforts to get Henry out of the tunnel, Sir Topham Hatt decided to let him stay by ripping up the rails and building a brick wall in front of the engine. This made Henry feel utterly sad, and he was stuck in the tunnel for a pretty long time. However, in the next episode, Edward, Gordon, and Henry, Gordon, the big engine, broke down with his express train, and Edward, the kind blue engine, tried but failed to move the heavy coaches. In response to Gordon's suggestion, Sir Topham Hatt gave Henry the opportunity to be real useful again, and the green engine agreed. After a brief exercise out of the tunnel, Henry was coupled up to the coaches and pulled them away with Edward as a pushing engine. The whole train sped down the main line on its non-stop journey to the station. Upon arrival, the passengers thanked Henry for his hard work, and Sir Topham Hatt, who rode on the train, gave him a new coat of paint as a reward for learning his lesson. In some episodes, primarily from series 1 to 5, Henry is not above being grumpy, rude, or agitated, but he absolutely has made some very happy memories. For example, after his accident with the Flying Kipper, a special freight train, he was rebuilt with the so-called new shape to run on ordinary coal instead of Welsh coal, which was his special requirement up until that time. And, more importantly, Henry shows his genuine interest in nature. This was conveniently retained during the hit entertainment era, that is from series 8 through 11, as illustrated in Henry and the Wishing Tree from season 8, and Henry and the Flagpole from season 9. While his personality turned somewhat friendlier in that era, one inconsistency about him was the recycled plot of requiring special coal, despite being fitted with the new shape. Regardless of these changes throughout the model series, there is one basic character trait that positively never goes away from Henry, which is sympathetic. So these are the reasons why this flawed but lucky green engine is my all-time favorite character of Thomas and Friends. The theme of Henry's Forest is simply about nature, and how the titular character gives lots of love and care to his kind of place. I absolutely love the exquisitely detailed scenery, especially from Series 3. Imagine the forest in the autumn. The leaves that may not match Henry's green paint, but that would still look beautiful in its own way. I doubt that it looks the same as the hit entertainment version. Henry's Forest isn't the only forest on the island of Sodor. There are several others around, including the spooky wood scene from a couple of Series 5 episodes. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not Henry's Forest, as confirmed in Haunted Henry. Also, in a Series 9 episode, Flower Power, Diesel told Thomas that they were passing through a haunted forest on their way to the flour mill because the story takes place on a Halloween night. However, Thomas, who covered himself in flour to pretend to be a ghost, realized that the forest wasn't scary at all. It was actually Henry's, so that was nice. Yes, a lot of horror films make forests look creepy, but real forests generally are not scary. I love going on nature walks near my town twice a year because of the episode's theme. Unfortunately, Henry's Forest became notorious for its controversy that was started by the Railway series author Wilbert Awdry. This episode is considered to be an all-original story, meaning that it's not based on any of the books he wrote. Awdry disapproved of the episode and explained that it lacked a realism in terms of railway practice. It's understandable to say that if the railway tracks are built in the middle of a forest, and if a steam train passes through, there could be a chance of a wildfire caused by some sparks coming out of a smokestack. Well, just because the scenery looks so realistic doesn't mean that there's no magic occurring in the TV series. If this were filmed in a realistic setting with no fantasy at all, for instance, engines with no faces, then Thomas and Friends wouldn't be a unique TV show, it would be a rather boring documentary series of some sort. With that being said, for those of you who are planning to build a model train layout, you don't have to replicate exactly what you see in the real world. You can do whatever you want. It's a railroad empire. So, I honestly disagree with what Audrey said about Henry's Forest. In other words, I wouldn't mind building a forested area with some railway tracks, should I ever build a more realistic train layout. Interestingly, in a Series 5 episode, James and the Trouble with Trees, Henry told James that Sir Topham Hatt was concerned about the trees being too close to the tracks. This statement was probably a reference to the aforementioned forest controversy. Maybe this could also be a mockery of Audrey's criticism. Who knows? Still, Henry's Forest is one of the reasons I believe in environmentalism, and yet it's just so magical to my heart. Many episodes of Thomas and Friends contain lots of busy action, as well as runaways, crashes, and other suspenseful events. On the contrary, the tone of Henry's Forest is mostly relaxing, comfy, tranquil, and other adjectives synonymous to them. There is no good Thomas episode without music, especially the original score composed by Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell. This story begins with Henry's theme tune in the style of the Series 3 format. That same tune was later repurposed, with a few modifications, in a Series 4 episode, Fish. Then we go to the main soundtrack for The Forest, which starts with a warm tone, but soon transitions into some mildly tense music to accompany the devastating storm. You can also hear the same thing near the end of another episode, Grand Puff, also from Series 4. After the engine's conversation about the storm, as well as the muffled sound of thunder, we now listen to the sorrowful tone of music to reflect Henry's depression. This lasts until the timber mill scene, where Thomas and Toby discuss their thoughts on how to mend the forest. There's a ditty of Toby puffing into the yard to see Sir Topham Hatt. And then we listen to a hopeful tune when the tram engine picks up the waiting cars full of trees and departs for the forest. Finally, we end up with this peacefully happy music that is perhaps a legendary tune for some Thomas fans. Although this was later used for a Series 3 episode, All at Sea, the last few bars were significantly changed to better suit the ending where Thomas, Percy, and Duck were watching the sea in a beautiful sunrise, or sunset, I'm not sure. Overall, the tone, combined with the music, makes Henry's Forest the most sentimental episode I've ever seen. Allow me to explain my Thomas videos that include Henry's Forest. I first watched the episode in a British VHS release, Thomas's Christmas Party, and 17 other stories. For that reason, it was narrated by Michael Angelis. I also saw the same episode in an American VHS release, Trust Thomas and Other Stories, as well as its DVD reissue of the same title. George Carlin was the storyteller for the US audience. I personally prefer the UK dub of Henry's Forest, but regardless of the narrator, you still get the same story plot wherever you live. Both Carlin and Angelis passed away in 2008 and 2020, respectively. Okay, that pretty much sums up the facts and personal thoughts on my all-time favorite episode, Henry's Forest. I hope you've enjoyed learning these elaborate details that make this episode so special and what sets it apart from any other Thomas story. I shouldn't say it's the best episode in this TV show, but it's still a wonderful part of my nostalgia, if you ask me. Even during the most undesirable times, such as Mattel butchering the true meaning of Thomas the Tank Engine, Henry's Forest will always be in my heart forever. It would be more beautiful if this became a sleep story in a meditation app. Very comfy. Now, to all Thomas fans who are watching my video, would you show this episode to people who have not seen the TV series? Sure you can. But first, I recommend checking out the Unlucky Tugs video, the 11 episodes that you should watch. He did a splendid job explaining why Thomas and Friends became a huge fandom, especially for adults, even though this show is naturally geared towards children. But there's no denying that it can be enjoyable for the whole family. Now, I don't think Henry's Forest is one of the most definitive episodes, but the purpose of my video is to illustrate my obsession with this particular story as a kid. One very last thing I want to discuss is to answer a question you may be asking me. If it wasn't for the production of Henry's Forest, would my life be really different? Well, yes and no. My favorite Thomas episode could be an adaptation from one of Wilbur Awdry's stories. It might be more or less impressive than Henry's Forest, but definitely never the same. There would also never be any hit-era episodes involving Henry's love of nature, neither the wishing tree nor the tall pine tree. The latter was featured in Henry and the Flagpole, by the way. Alright, this has been the full analysis of my favorite episode of Thomas and Friends. I absolutely enjoyed producing this video, and I'm hoping to make some more analyses on other episodes I like. If you have any suggestions, please let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll decide what to do next. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I'm Brian LaRosa, and I'll see you next time. Cheerio!